What actually destroys a society? Is it invasion and pollution from outside, or is it internal rigidity? In Things Fall Apart, Umuofia appears strong, structured, disciplined, and deeply rooted in tradition. And yet it collapses. Not just because outsiders arrived, but perhaps because it couldn't change fast enough. Things Fall Apart is often read as a story about colonization. But you could also see it as something more complex. A tension between culture and change. Before we talk about failure, it's important to acknowledge something. Umuofia worked. Its traditions were not random, they formed a coherent system. The justice was delivered through the Egwegwu, an organized collective authority. On the other hand, titles and achievements structured leadership and respect. And family roles ensured order and continuity. The Week of Peace, for instance, regulated violence and preserved stability. You could argue that culture here provided three essential things: identity, stability, and belonging. And for a long time, that seems to have been enough. So perhaps the better question is not whether the system worked, but what happens to a system like this when it is forced to adapt. At the same time, not everyone experienced this system equally. Some existed at its edges. The Osu were excluded permanently. Twins were abandoned under religious belief. Nuoi, for example, seems to feel a quiet but growing discomfort. These may look like isolated cultural practices, but they could also be seen as points of tension within the system. And that raises an important possibility. When a system excludes certain people, does it unintentionally create openings for alternative systems? Because when new beliefs arrived, they didn't immediately confront Umuofia's strongest members. They attracted those who already felt disconnected. So maybe the issue wasn't just external influence, but internal gaps that made that influence effective. When the missionaries first arrive, Umuofia doesn't react with urgency. Instead, it tolerates them. Giving them land in the evil forest might have seemed like a calculated move. Perhaps even a way to dismiss them. But when they survive and begin to grow, the response doesn't seem to evolve with the situation. There's no clear strategy to either contain the influence, integrate it, or to directly oppose it in a unified way. And this raises a subtle but critical distinction. There's a difference between allowing change and managing change. Umuofia appears to do the first, but not the second. And by the time the threat is fully recognized, it may already be embedded within the society itself. What makes this more complex is that not everyone fully agreed with the system. There are hints, sometimes quiet, sometimes indirect. Nuoi's shift suggests moral conflict. Women experience limitations but have little space to challenge them. Alternative perspectives exist but rarely dominate. It seems that in Umuofia, strength is closely tied to conformity. And that takes us to another important question. What happens to a society when criticism cannot exist openly within it? Because instead of reforming the system from within, those who disagree appear to move outside of it. And when that happens, change is no longer controlled internally, giving room for outside influence. At its core, this may not be a story about tradition failing. It may be about inflexibility under pressure. All cultures rely on tradition, but survival often depends on the ability to reinterpret, adjust, and to absorb new realities. Umuofia, however, seems to prioritize preservation. And this is reflected strongly in Okonkwo. To him, strength means holding on. Not bending, not changing. There is a difficult question here. At what point does strength become rigidity? And in a changing environment, is there assurance that what once protected a society might not become a limitation in itself? So what really led to Umuofia's collapse? It could be colonization. It could be internal division. Or perhaps, more convincingly, it's the interaction between the two. A system that excludes some and resists adaptation, a tradition that limits internal critique, may struggle when faced with rapid change. And maybe that's the deeper takeaway. Not that tradition is the problem, but that tradition without flexibility can become fragile.